a biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Right, now we're going to welcome Mandy Worby, who's going to bring us up to speed with the latest developments that are happening in the Middle East and Israel with breaking Israel news. Welcome back to 2020, Mandy Worby.
Hi, nice to be with you, Tosh.
It's great to have you with us, Mandy. And we understand in the last week sometime, there was a vote in the UN in favour of the Palestinian state. That's going to throw the cat amongst the pigeons.
Well, you know, the funny thing is everybody thinks it will, but, you know, what's it actually going to do? It's not actually going to make a slicker difference to what's going on the ground, because the United Nations actually doesn't have the power to do that. But there's an organisation called the Hague Initiative for International Cooperation, or THINK for short, and they released some information about the UN vote for a Palestinian state, and it pointed out some really important facts that are being completely overlooked and ignored by the nations of the world. There are three main points here. One is their recognition sent a very strong message that terrorism, quote, yields diplomatic concessions. Number two, it, quote, undermines international law and well-established norms for defining statehood that requires a set of agreements that remain binding on both parties. And three, by disregarding this framework, quote, it indicates that legally binding instruments can be cast aside when expedient. This undermines treaty obligations worldwide, and it weakens the rule of law. So, in other words, what that means is, when it comes to Israel and a Palestinian state, the normal international rules are being completely ignored.
Yeah.
All right? And they apply to all other peoples around the world, but the Palestinians are not required to meet the same obligations, and certainly not in the right way. Terrorism is getting them what they want.
Terrorism yields diplomatic concessions.
Yeah, it's a very dangerous move, okay? In 1933, there was a convention called the Montevideo Convention on the Rights and Duties of States. Now, at this convention, it outlined the requirements that are needed to be met for a state to be recognised as sovereign and independent.
Right.
And there are four essential criteria that has to be met before sovereignty and independence can be recognised and granted. And this is what they have to meet. They have to have a permanent population. They must have a defined territory. They must have an effective government, and only then can they have recognition or of capacity to enter relations with other states. Now, it has also got to be pointed out that they have to have a functioning economy to fund themselves. And the PA and Hamas rely solely on the donations and funding of other nations. So they don't have an independent, sustainable, self-sufficient economy. So in this convention, it actually says this, quote, according to the UN's own logic, Palestine does not have a permanent population in that many residents are considered to have inherited refugee status. In 1951, the Refugee Convention defines a refugee as someone outside the country of his nationality, in contrast to the idea of a settled permanent national population. What does that mean? Since the Palestinians claim they're refugees because of Israel's war of independence, they can't be considered a permanent population. If they renounce their refugee status, then UNRWA would have to be completely dissolved, because if it only exists to work with Palestinian refugees, and they would no longer have the claim of the right of return to Israel, right? So the Palestinians are never going to relinquish that, which means they're not a permanent population. The report goes on to say, in its 2020 prosecution request, the ICC acknowledged that Palestinian borders are disputed and that there is no single governing body, right? So the PE, or the PLO, does not have effective control over the defined territory as required by the convention. Then you've got the Oslo Accords, which established the PA, limited the PA's authority to self-govern only in certain areas pending a negotiated settlement. Until then, Israel lawfully retains various levels of control in the West Bank as per the Accords. The report goes on to say that even within those areas under full PA control, the leadership is divided. The PLO represents Palestinians internationally. Hamas acts as a militarized authority in Gaza, and Fatah dominates in the West Bank. all operating separately and not under a single governing body. So that you've got this proliferation of jihadist groups in the West Bank, and it's posing additional challenges to the PA's authority. So they don't have a single government working together on its own.
So with all of this division in and around the running of the nation, the government...
they're not.
That's what I'm saying. With all of this division in there, is the UN vote more just a showpiece?
It is. It's political. That's all it is. It's political and it's anti-Israel. Okay, because when you consider that when Hamas won the election in 2006, 2007 in Gaza, they immediately slaughtered the Fatah members that were part of the PA. So they were killing each other.
Wow.
But after the UN, you look at the UN's posture, people are asking the question, well, can the UN create a state? Now, the question was answered really well in an article that's titled just that, Can the UN Create a State? And it was written by Arthur A. Flower, and it's available at All Israel News. Now, in it, he goes back to 2012 when the UN General Assembly voted to give a non-existent state non-member observer status. And what that means, it was a legal absurdity. A state in a nation that didn't exist was given a speaking part in the Assembly without the right to vote. And the author wrote, this wasn't a recognition of fact, but an act of political creationism, okay? And it defied the UN's own rules. The UN Charter is explicitly clear. It says membership, and by extension, the privileges associated with statehood is open to peace-loving states. Oh. So how can an entity be deemed peace-loving when one of its two governing powers, which is the US and the UA, have designated terrorist organisations that launched this brutal war on October 7, and the leaders of whom are calling for open genocide against the Jews, which means it's not a peace-loving state. So the PA and Hamas have charters that declare their goals and aspirations are to wipe Israel from the face of the earth, which disqualifies them from UN inclusion and statehood. So he says in conclusion, no, the United Nations cannot create a state. It can only recognise what already exists. So by attempting to anoint Palestine as a state through a political vote, the UN is engaging in this very dangerous fantasy. Again, this article was written by Arthur A. Flower, a highly qualified journalist, and the article is called Can a UN Create a State? It's at All Israel News. So it's a pretty dangerous situation, quite a dangerous situation. But it is not going. This vote is not going to bring about a Palestinian state. Japan has refused to vote for it. Fiji and many others in the Pacific Islands have refused to vote for it. It's not going to make a difference, but it is going to make it harder to get rid of Hamas because they're just being legitimised by all these recognitions.
Amazing. With the developments that are happening, what's happening in Israel? In that area around the Israeli targeting Hamas in Qatar.
Okay, so remember it hit the news that Israel took out some Hamas leaders in Qatar, okay?
Yep.
And the Americans came out and said, yes, Qatar was actually informed. It was solely an operation of Israel. America didn't participate. They had nothing to do with it. But they did warn Qatar that it was coming. And after that, of course, Qatar has gone all, this is terrible. They held an emergency Muslim country summit where more than 50 nations came together and they all said, we want to have a global, campaign to destroy Israel, blah, 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 blah. It actually achieved nothing because all those nations couldn't agree on what they were going to do. They didn't agree on what protocols or what campaigns they would embark upon. Many of the nations, of those more moderate Muslim nations, were saying, oh, well, we need to push for a two-state solution. Iran was in this summit and they said, well, no, we're opposed to a two-state solution. And you know why? It's because all their proxies and Iran, they don't want a two-state solution. They are all opposed to a two-state solution because they want Israel gone. They want there to be a one-state solution. So they haven't come to agreement on that. But do you remember during the 12-day war when Israel and America took out the nuclear infrastructure in Iran?
Yeah, big news.
At the end of that, Iran bombed Qatar.
Okay.
They bombed Qatar and attacked an American base. No Qataris were killed, but they attacked Qatar. And what did Qatar do? They said, oh, that's terrible. You've picked on us and we condemn it. But then they did nothing. Remember when America went into Pakistan and took out Osama bin Laden?
Yes.
What did the world do? Nothing.
Nothing.
Israel took out terrorists that were being funded, harboured, protected, defended and looked after by Qatar, in Qatar, and Qatar has gone all crazy about it, all right? So with that in mind, the only nation that gets treated differently from when many other nations do the same thing is Israel, okay? But, you know, as we have seen, if there are terrorists out there who want to destroy Israel and they're targeting her people, Israel will do what is necessary to protect itself. You know, this is the nature of war. This war was foisted on Israel. She doesn't want to fight this war, but she's not going to allow terrorists to attack her people again. So it's diplomatic. I don't know what's going to come of it, but I personally think, and this is just my personal opinion, that Qatar is using this as a means of flexing its power, if you will. It is a tiny nation.
Yes,
it's a tiny nation. You know, 2.5 million. 2.5 million.
Yes.
Is all that it is, and they're dictating to the rest of the world. But why? It's because it's filthy, stinking rich, and so many nations of the world have really got into bed with them through trade deals. They want their money. Okay, so whatever Qatar says is they want it. 2.5 million people are dictating to the rest of the world. So
Wow.
I think that's mostly what it has to do with.
And speaking of small populations, what's happening in Gaza?
Yes. Okay, so what's happening in Gaza is there's a concerted effort, an operation into Gaza City that's now underway. So far, Israel has been able to facilitate 370,000 Gazans getting out of Gaza City, getting to safety. There are many who want to get out of there, but they can't because it costs a lot of money to relocate. They don't have the money. There are lots of empty UN trucks, I just might add, lots of empty UN trucks that could actually load these families up and get them to safety, but the UN won't help because they don't want to upset Hamas. But I know.
Boggles the mind.
It does boggle the mind. But many of them have actually got to safety, which is great. And this offensive that Israel believes is the last stronghold and bastion of Hamas operatives, and they want to get rid of them. And their hope is that by the end of this year, the end of 2025, the war will be over, and they want to get their people out of there. They want to rescue the hostages. But the concern is, and the rumour is, well, it's not really a rumour, they know what's happened is that the Hamas have actually apparently brought the hostages out of the tunnels, but they're now using them as human shields as Israel is going in. But at the moment, the ground operation is going very well. We don't know all the details of it because Israel's not going to let anybody know.
The ground operation, it has an objective of being able to clear out the tunnels once and for all.
They want to clear out the tunnels, they want to get rid of Hamas, and they want to bring their people home, and then the war's over. That's what they want.
God willing, hey?
God willing.
And what do you see coming up in the next week or two?
That's a conversation that could last a couple of hours, Tosh.
Well, we only got a couple of minutes.
Well, I don't know. I don't know in the next hours and days, but it's changing as we go. But you know what I do want to I want to point to Scripture.
Please do.
Because the Bible actually does tell us very clearly that Jerusalem, that Israel is going to be isolated in these last days, okay? Yep. And I want to read to you from Zechariah chapter 12, verses 1 and 3. It says this, "The burden of the word of the Lord against Israel. Thus says the Lord, who stretches out the heavens, lays the foundations of the earth, and forms the spirit of man within him. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness to all the people, surrounding peoples, when they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem." That's Israel. "And it shall happen in that day that I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all peoples. All who would heave it away shall surely be cut to pieces, though all the nations of the earth are gathered against it." Now that's bad news for the nations of the world. But I would encourage everyone to go and read Zechariah 12 because it goes on to talk about what God will do for Judah and Jerusalem, that's Israel, and how God will pour upon his people a spirit of grace and supplication that they are going to look upon the Messiah that they initially rejected and they're going to recognize him. And that's the day of national salvation for the people of Israel, and it's getting closer every single day.
Mandy Worby, thank you once again for coming and bringing us up to speed with events in Israel and the Middle East.
My pleasure.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.